billionaire struck off the dental register for fraud and malpractice. Dara McIntyre reports.
Bruce Kelso, a millionaire dentist with a taste for flash cars, waterfront houses, and 3 of the finest seaside views you ever did see.
I'd like him to answer for it. You know, stand in the court and say, why did you do it?
It was extreme, and I mean extreme, pain.
I would say it took 60 or 70 there to get the one that was causing the bother in the first place.
£3,000-4,000 I've paid for my 4 front teeth.
He was stealing thousands of pounds from the health service for years, and they knew it.
The department, the CSA and the board were advised that we should do nothing proactively with Mr. Kelso.
So why wasn't Bruce Kelso stopped?
When we received a very serious set of information, we took decisive action to protect patients. This was a bad dentist, a rogue dentist, if you like.
What condition did you leave your teeth in?
I'll tell you what condition leaves the teeth in. There's it there. Look at the gums.
He has made himself rich in other people's misery.
Hello? Mr. Bruce Kelso, are you there? 6 weeks ago, County Down dentist Bruce Kelso was struck off the dental register for fraud and malpractice. His 2 surgeries, one here in Newton Ards, the other in Grey Abbey, are now both closed. Tonight's Spotlight reveals how the health authorities knew about his activities almost 9 years ago, and how the police were handed the evidence file but took no action. How was a rogue dentist able to get away with it? The Ards Peninsula in County Down, picture postcard pretty. It was here Bruce Kelso established himself as a dentist after graduating from Queen's University in 1976. The young Kelso, originally from a middle-class background in East Belfast, was first employed here at Ards Dental Practice, where there were no issues with his treatment. Ambitious and flamboyant with a taste for fast cars, here he is rallying in the early 80s. He was soon branching out on his own, and by 1988 had 3 busy practices with thousands of patients at Portaferry, Grey Abbey and Newton Ards. 10 years ago he built himself this exclusive home on the shores of Strangford Lough. It's now worth £1 million plus. Around the side, his Porsche 4x4 with its distinctive personalised number plate. He also owns an apartment overlooking the Côte d'Azur in the south of France, next door to the Monte Carlo racing circuit, as well as a house in Connemara, where he's one of a select few who pay to fish here at Ballynahinch Castle. But these extra special trappings of wealth have to be paid for, and it seems Bruce Kelso took shortcuts to pay for them, as the General Dental Council report into his activities illustrates. They found that he had been defrauding the health service, making false claims for work he hadn't done, and that much of the work that he actually did was seriously deficient in many aspects. The handling of x-rays, root canal work and the treatment of disease, which led to patients suffering unnecessarily. And they also said he failed to maintain adequate medical histories, which could have compromised patient safety. I decided to try to contact some of Bruce Kelso's patients to get their opinion on his treatment. Hello, is that the Chronicle? Yes, I'd like to place an ad in the newspaper, please. Yes, for the next edition, please. Thanks very much. A small box ad for the middle of the paper.
Whenever I was
with him. He fitted 2 crowns, so he did, in which I didn't need, because one...
No, I had a very bad experience. He definitely was a sort of a gaping wound, with sort of a left surgery with blood coming out of my mouth and stuff.
Hello. Hello, how are you?
Since having moved to
Yes,
a different
yes,
dentist,
that's
I'm
right.
now having the majority of my work redone at the new dentist.
He was a butcher. That's what he was like. He was rough.
More than 60 calls were logged. 2/3 of them were from patients critical of the Ard's dentist. We met some of those patients over the next weeks. Many agreed that in the early days, Bruce Kelso was a good dentist.
He was a pleasant man and a pleasant dentist, and he was very, very gentle with his patients.
Treatment then was fantastic. He really looked after me then.
Others have less pleasant memories.
He put one knee on my chest and one foot on the floor, and had another go at pulling the tooth out and couldn't. So he cracked it, tooth to one side, still didn't come out.
That treatment, almost a cartoon dentist caricature, was meted out to a Portaferry patient. It was his eagerness to sign up Portaferry patients to his practice that led to a meeting with health officials in 1993. The Central Services Agency, the CSA, which manages payments to all NHS dentists, discovered that Bruce Kelso had effectively forged the signatures of dozens of patients and registered them with his practice, collecting a small fee each time.
Well, he accepted that, yes, signatures had been done on behalf of patients. And
that's forged signatures, in other words.
Well, that's a technical term, and probably were, but he said that the signatures had been done on behalf of the patients.
The authorities took no action when Kelso agreed to get the patients to sign themselves, but they had been warned. Already patients were beginning to have concerns.
He took the nerve out of my tooth, which then led on to problems of tooth going black and taking abscesses after abscess. He then fitted veneers on the front 4 teeth, and then the nerves had to come out of the other teeth. The veneers were too big, and I had to then get crowns fitted, which were too small and had gaps on either side, and they were much darker than my other teeth. And then I had to get more crowns again, and then I've just been getting treatment ever since that. I would say £3,000–4,000 I've paid for my 4 front teeth.
To fix up the work that Mr. Kelso did?
Yes.
We wanted to ask Bruce Kelso about his treatment of patients and his fraud. He hadn't been seen at his home along Strangford Lough recently, so I decided to visit him at one of his other homes. Menton on the French Riviera, favoured by many wealthy expats. This is where Bruce Kelso has his second home, with fantastic views over the bay to Monte Carlo. It's just up here, very, very security conscious around here. Everyone seems to have secure radio-controlled entrances. This is his place here, and again, secure entrance and exit. Campus Sud, 18 Catherine Mansfield Avenue. There's a code here for Kelso's, which we'll have to find. 206. So I'll press this now and see if they're in. See if Bruce Kelso will speak to us. Hello? Hello, is anyone in? Dara McIntyre from the BBC looking to speak to Mr. Kelso. Mr. Bruce Kelso, are you there? As far as we know, no one was there. Officials were already paying special attention to Bruce Kelso when they found the first definitive evidence of fraud in November 1997. The dentist submitted a claim for treating himself. First, he changed his name just a little so he wouldn't get caught.
And this was for George Kelso Kelson. It was the same date of birth as himself.
How would a dentist perform dentistry on themselves?
Well, they wouldn't.
Bruce Kelso later claimed for treating his wife Sandra, but with more of a stark cheek, said she was on low income and didn't have to pay for her treatment. There is no suggestion that this was done with the consent or knowledge of Sandra Kelso, who at that time was running her own business, now under different management. But here was clear evidence of brazen fraud. Health officials who had already suspected Bruce Kelso decided to take their investigations further, and in 1999 some of his patients were re-examined and x-rayed here in Newton Ards.
When those x-rays were developed, they showed that there were no root fillings in the teeth where Mr. Kelso had claimed and been paid for doing root fillings.
The next move was expected to lead to the dentist being dealt with swiftly. Instead, it would leave patients at risk for at least 3 years longer than they should have been. The RUC Fraud Squad was called in.
They advised that we ought to pick a 6-month period and we ought to send and examine every patient. And the period then chosen was January to June 1999. That involved something of the order of 170 patients.
One of the patients called was Lawrence Edge from Portaferry. He'd been having problems with Bruce Kelso and decided to go to another dentist.
When she done the x-rays, I was asked to come back again, and she took different fillings out on this side and that side, and found little small pins which were corroded and some were
metal pins?
Yes, small metal pins, and a few bits of cotton that shouldn't be there at all. It was cleaning different sides and lots of let these bits in and filled over the top of them.
To leave cotton wool, you've mentioned bits of paper, you've mentioned broken instruments in the tooth. That is not normal practice. Sometimes accidents happen when we're carrying out treatment for patients, and bits of instruments can break within root canal systems, but it's normal to explain that to the patient and take appropriate action after that.
It quickly emerged that Lawrence Edge was not alone in getting substandard treatment. The government dentists who carried out the re-examination for the police in 1999 reported problems with 95% of the cases. The evidence was clear-cut. Bruce Kelso wasn't just fiddling money, he was doling out bad treatment too, putting patients' health at risk.
It appeared that there was fraud. It appeared that his records were very poor records, incomplete, bits missing, x-rays missing, and therefore it was logical that it was likely that patients had not received care that he had claimed for.
Negligence, evidence of negligence.
Likely negligence. Yeah.
That's disgusting. It is disgusting. They should have shut him down then, and then he wouldn't have traumatised so many people's mouths.
I hoped to put some of these issues to Bruce Kelso when I found his third home in Roundstone, Connemara, a fine house by the sea bought 14 years ago, now worth £400,000. This is the area of the Balnahinch fishery, one of the most renowned salmon fisheries in Ireland, and it's here that Bruce Kelso comes most summers to fish, and in the hope of catching prize salmon or prize sea trout. And we can tell you he has been successful. He features on a website. Wonderful photograph of him with 3 prize fish. So Bruce, whatever about his dentistry, he's a good fisherman. All locked up, no one at home. The launch of the police investigation didn't stop Bruce Kelso making money. He was paid £125,000 by the NHS in 1999. His total earnings that year higher still. But the police involvement did have one major consequence. It allowed Bruce Kelso to carry on working with patients. Health officials say they were told not to interfere.
We, the department, the CSA and the board were advised that we should do nothing proactively with Mr. Kelso. Leave it with us. We do not wish you to do anything to compromise our investigation.
It's unbelievable that they let him go on. Just shocked at that. I didn't know that.
The Health Board didn't and still doesn't have the power to suspend rogue dentists, but it could have sent the Kelso file to the General Dental Council, which does have those powers. It chose not to. Today, the Health Board says it thought the GDC would tell it to exhaust all other forms of inquiry, including the police investigation first. Why didn't you go to the GDC in 1999 instead of to the police, or to the police and the GDC simultaneously?
At that time, they perceived their role as we can't take on investigations from scratch for every dentist that a health authority in the UK reports to us. We need those health authorities to use their local abilities to take discipline, to take them criminal prosecution, whatever. When those facts are then reported to the GDC, we will then act.
When we received a very serious set of information in 2004, we took decisive action to protect patients and the public in Northern Ireland and across the rest of the UK. And in 1999, if we'd had that information then, we would have done the same. And the facts are that when we received that information, we stepped forward, we did our bit.
But the General Dental Council did know something about Bruce Kelso as far back as 2001. Then they received 4 separate complaints about the dentist from patients who'd been treated privately. The complaints about treatment and billing made little difference. The GDC left Bruce Kelso working. If the health authorities were relying on the police, some patients were taking legal action. The BBC knows of one lawsuit settled in 2002, but with a gagging clause. Secrecy was vital for Bruce Kelso. Whatever officials knew, those who needed to know most would have to learn through experience.
This abscess would have returned about twice a year, and in the same place, and down the whole face was swollen. Extreme swelling. The children would call me Elephant Mum. It was so bad. It was literally from forehead. The eyes were sore with the pain, the swelling, and it come down to the throat. You know, all up this side. And then when it would go back, it would give me penicillin, which would clear it.
Dentists we've spoken to, all familiar with Bruce Kelso's work, say he administered antibiotics freely. The problem is the drugs don't deal with the source of the infection.
It's well accepted now that antibiotics are not the treatment for abscesses. They can be used as an adjunct at times, but the treatment is to remove the source of the infection, ideally through root canal treatment.
So if somebody is routinely administering antibiotics as a primary treatment, that's wrong?
That is not accepted practice.
Bad practice?
It's certainly outside the norm, yes.
All this might have been brought to an end by the police investigation, but in 2002, 3 years after they took charge of what appeared to be a routine case, they pulled out. At a meeting in April, they told dental officials they weren't able to continue the investigation.
I was annoyed because 3 years had gone by. If this guy was as bad as we thought he was, what we believed in the board was the primary task we had was to get him stopped.
Under the Freedom of Information Act, I've been able to obtain the minutes of that meeting between the police and the civil servants. These documents reveal that the police believed the case was dead because a government dentist, who'd collated most of the evidence and was due to be a key witness, was ill and wouldn't be available to testify. Without that witness, the meeting was told the case hadn't a hope. The investigation ended there, but it can't have been helped by the fact that at different stages, 3 separate police officers headed the inquiry. It was now 4 years since the start of the original investigation into Bruce Kelso, and patients were still suffering.
One day I went in to him and I told him I had another abscess. He says, "Oh, it wouldn't be you if you didn't have an abscess." And he said, "You know, you're just run down." I said, "There's something wrong with my gums." He said, oh no, you're just run down, because I had blisters in my gums, and there was, and you know, like infected stuff coming out of my gums, and I knew there was something not right. And he said, oh, you're just run down, that'll clear up on its own. I said, is that right? So I said, well, I'm going to the doctor. So he nearly jumped a foot in the air. He said, what do you want to go to the doctor for? I said, well, if I'm run down, I want to know what's wrong with me.
Sandra Dorian actually required emergency treatment from a dentist at the Royal Victoria Hospital.
He came and he had a look at my mouth, and he looked at me in disgust. He said, do you never go to the dentist? Nearly everything had to be redone. My mouth was in a terrible state with abscesses that had been healed over and more come out and healed over and more, and nothing was ever done.
After the collapse of the police investigation, health officials wrote to Bruce Kelso outlining possible action against him. Meanwhile, Will Maxwell forwarded another complaint to the General Dental Council. This one followed a court award of £2,000 to one of his patients.
The solicitor had written to Mr. Kelso on behalf of the patient saying, would you please forward a cheque for £2,000, and Mr. Kelso had written back saying he had no money, he didn't have any indemnity cover, so he would be unable to pay, so go away. So the solicitor was ringing me up just initially to inquire, do dentists have to have indemnity cover?
Of course they do.
And I was able to tell him categorically, yes they do, and if Mr. Kelso does not have any indemnity cover, he's breaking the law and the GDC would be interested.
The dentist did have indemnity cover, but appears to have been trying to avoid paying up. This complaint was the 5th in 2 years received by the General Dental Council. Alarm bells should have been ringing, but again, nothing happened to stop Bruce Kelso working. His patients were left at risk.
In hindsight, one can look back and say, in 2001, 2003, if we received a small number of isolated complaints, isn't it a shame that we didn't know at that time that there was all this other massive information that did give rise to such concern when it came to our notice? But in the real world, we have to operate with the information that we have on any given day about any given dentist. The information that we had in 2001 and 2003, when looked at in that way, was dealt with appropriately.
It makes me angry that he's been under investigation and that it continued for so long and he wasn't struck off.
Bruce Kelso worked on all through 2003, but by now officials appear to have changed focus from the fraud allegations to patients' welfare. Letters are exchanged where Bruce Kelso says some of his work certainly appears to be substandard. He says medical advice suggests he shouldn't even have been working at all for the past 12 to 18 months due to his ill health. But 2 months later he writes again, this time more defensive, insisting his level of errors is comparable to any other dentist. This was all part of a doomed process of negotiation, and while it stalled, officials were unable to find many of the original investigation files. Eastern Health Board officials claim some were lost by the PSNI. Finally, in June 2004, the Eastern Health Board passed on all the evidence from the original investigation by the police years earlier to the General Dental Council. Bruce Kelso was eventually suspended in April 2005, 8 years after he had claimed payment for treating himself. All too late for patient Isabel Edmond.
About January 2004, I got a letter in from the dental officers asking me would I come up for a routine check on Mr. Kelso's work, and I looked at it and thought, yeah, no problem, I'll go up. And about 4 days after I got the letter, I got this telephone call from Mr. Kelso telling me, don't bother coming up, but you don't have to go, you know, you're not obliged to go, I'll sort it out with them.
It seems Bruce Kelso wanted to stop dental inspectors seeing his handiwork. Instead, he began a course of treatment that ended with Isabel losing 6 teeth in as many months. Isabel went to another dentist that summer.
She was able to save one of the teeth that Mr. Kelso had started to do a root canal filling in. And she told me that there was cotton wool actually in the hole and there should have been antibiotic. She actually showed me the cotton wool.
The final General Dental Council hearing was held in September. Bruce Kelso submitted evidence that he was ill, but the GDC said the inquiry should go ahead anyway, and after a 6-day hearing, erased him from the dental register.
A good dentist puts patients' interest first. A good dentist takes radiographs appropriately, uses them professionally, and doesn't exploit the public purse for their own personal gain, leaving patients in need of treatment and letting disease go untreated. Mr. Kelso appeared to have failed on those scores according to the findings of our committee. And therefore, if you're asking where does he come on the scale, this is one of the most serious cases of recent years.
The General Dental Council didn't determine the exact scale of the fraud involved, but health officials here have done an audit of one 6-month period in 1999 and believe £15,000 was defrauded in that time alone. Extrapolating that over, say, 10 years, and the figure matures into £300,000. But focus on the fraud and you miss the other bottom line, patient welfare. Isn't it the case that patients' welfare was in fact compromised between the late 90s and 2005 when Mr. Kelso finally stopped practicing?
I think that would have to be accepted. I think undoubtedly he has probably compromised the best care of patients while he's been working.
The Eastern Health Board believes it did its best in the circumstances, but came up against a number of dead ends. It concedes, though, that with hindsight it might do things differently. I asked the Health Minister, Paul Goggins, whether he thought officials, including his own NHS staff, had done their job properly. He declined to do an interview, but did issue a statement.
I am alarmed by the issues raised by Spotlight, particularly patient safety. I will also be vigorously exploring every avenue to see how any loss of funds that may have been incurred as a result of negligence or inappropriate claims can be recovered. I am deeply concerned by the length of time that has elapsed between our dental referral officers picking this up in 1999 and the dentist actually being struck off in 2006.
Mr. Goggins said health authorities here will be given powers to suspend dentists next year. Spotlight has learned that these powers were introduced in England and Wales in 2001. As for the police, they issued a 2-line statement this week saying,
"We are aware of and examining all circumstances surrounding allegations of fraud. No formal investigation has commenced."
The Eastern Health and Social Services Council says a recall of Bruce Kelso's patients ought to be considered. Many of those patients feel let down by the health authorities.
They let him practice from then till 2000 by knowing. That shows you. They don't care too much about the folk that's going to dentists. So they don't.
They failed. They failed the patients. They failed the people. And they need to answer these questions as well, along with Kelso.
They must have known, with all the hospital treatment and everything else, they must have known the patients were suffering.
As for Bruce Kelso, we did try to put the issues raised in the programme to him in writing and then by phone. Bruce Kelso never responded. It's understood the Eastern Health Board has begun proceedings to get some of our money back. Meanwhile, Bruce Kelso, who theoretically can reapply to practice as a dentist in just 9 months, now has a full pension from the National Health Service. None of this will be of any consolation to his patients.
He's got his money, he's made his money, he's out of here, and he's never coming back.
That's the thing that probably does annoy me most, that I actually trusted him. He was a professional and we put our health and our life in professional hands and we expect them to act professionally.
When I had my teeth, they were lovely. I had lovely teeth. I was very proud of the way I looked. But since I lost my teeth, I don't wear makeup, I don't wear lipstick, it's not the same. It's just completely different.